All right, so let's take you to the CODEO now because they are addressing the press there about what they've also monitored on the electoral process so far. Let's take you to the CODEO head office now.
So this intention, with rapid response observers stationed in 3,401 randomly selected polling stations. These observers are Ghanaians from every walk of life and have volunteered their time to ensure that registered voters cast their ballot freely on election day. Of the 4,000 observers deployed, 1,500 are PVT observers deployed to a nationally representative sample of polling stations. As at 10:30 a.m. today, 1,499 of the 1,500 PVT observers, that is 99% in all 276 constituencies across the 16 regions of the country, had submitted reports about the setup and opening of polling stations. Arrival at polling stations. Upon arrival at 6 a.m., CODEO observers reported seeing election officials in 85% of polling stations. However, in 12% of polling stations, CODEO observers did not see election officials when they arrived. In 3% of polling stations, observers arrived after 6 p.m. 6 a.m., sorry. Thank you for being more awake than me. It makes me know that I'm reading to people who are awake. Thank you very much. Let me take that again. Upon arrival at 6 a.m., CODEO observers reported seeing election officials in 85% of polling stations. However, in 12% of polling stations, CODEO observers did not see election officials when they arrived. In 3% of polling stations, observers arrived after 6 a.m. Opening of polling stations. By 7:15 a.m., only 66% of the polling stations were open. Another 31% of polling stations opened with a slight delay between 7:16 and 8 a.m. due to the late arrival of polling staff or the absence of some electoral materials. Additionally, 4% of polling stations opened between 8:01 and 10 a.m. Only 1% of polling stations opened after 10 a.m. Regions where CODEO observed a relatively higher number of polling stations opening after 7:15 a.m. include the Northern, that's 52% of polling stations, OT 49%, Northeast 47%, Greater Accra 44%, and Eastern 42%. Most polling stations, that's about 90%, had the minimum number of election officials, that's 5. Another 10% had 1 to 4 officials at the time of setup. In 93% of polling stations where CODEO observers were located, electoral officials respected their status as Electoral Commission's accredited election observers and permitted them to observe the polls upon arrival. The remaining 7% of observers were later permitted to observe the elections. Set up for polls. According to CODEO's observers, the majority of polling stations had a representation of women among the EC officials. 14% had 5 women officials, 63% had 2 or 3 women, and 17% had just 1 woman. However, at 6% of polling stations, CODEO observers reported no women among the EC officials. According to CODEO observers, Presiding officers in 86% of polling stations are men. The remaining 14% of polling stations had women as presiding officers. CODEO observers reported that 98% of polling stations were set up to allow voters to mark their ballots in secret. However, the setup did not ensure vote secrecy in 2% of polling stations. They also reported that 6% of all polling stations were not accessible to persons with disabilities and older people. Ladies and gentlemen, at the time of setup, CODEO observers reported seeing polling agents of the two main political parties in almost all polling stations, that is the NPP 99%, NDC 99%. One-third of polling stations also had agents of independent candidates, that's 32%, and other parties, 32%. CODEO observers' reports showed that all polling stations had a ballot box, ballot papers, indelible ink, validating stamp, endorsing ink, and ink pad, while 99% had a voting screen and 82% had tactile ballot papers. However, in certain locations, materials arrived late, delaying the opening of the polling stations. According to CODEO observers, 74% of polling stations had the expected number of biometric devices, that is 2, and 26% had only 1 device. Our observers note that voter registers were made available at all polling stations. In almost all the polling stations, that's 99%, CODEO observers reported that ballot booklets have serial numbers in numeric order. Before voting started, CODEO observers could confirm that all the presidential and parliamentary ballot boxes were empty, sealed, and in plain view. CODEO observers again report seeing roaming and station security personnel at 98% of polling stations. Only 2% of polling stations were reported to have no security personnel. CODEO observers' report again shows that security personnel were unarmed at 78% of the polling stations. However, 20% of the polling stations had armed security personnel. Reported incidents. CODEO observers have reported a number of incidents at some polling stations. Some of the confirmed incidents so far include intimidation or harassment, that's 14 incidents, violence, 13 incidents, violation of voting procedures, 18 incidents, vote buying, bribery, 3 incidents, and various other incidents, that's 26 reported and confirmed. Some of the incidents reported so far include the following. At the CMB polling station in Pumpunasi, in Tano South, in the Afo region, the validating stamp for the parliamentary ballot paper was reported to be faulty, making it impossible to read when ballots were stamped. This halted the voting process for about 1 hour 40 minutes before voting resumed. At the DA Primary School, Tuani Kope, in South Tong constituency in the Volta region, parliamentary ballot papers were not available during the setup. EC officials brought the ballots subsequently at 10:45 a.m., after which the polling station opened at 10:50 a.m. At Nkuzezi Primary School at Nabdam in the Upper East, party leaders from both the NPP and the NDC were telling voters in line who to vote for. This caused anger among the voters and led to some fighting. A police officer later arrived and calmed the situation. At the Brekuso Daycare Center, one in the Kwapim South in the eastern region, a voter was seen videotaping his ballot paper after marking it. At the Nungwa polling station, one in the Greater Accra region, 2 verification machines did not function properly for 2 hours. Voters were asked to go and return. At 10:15 a.m., the manual verification process was used to commence voting. The ballot paper booklets at the Papti School, Santa Maria 2, Anya Sewutum, Greater Accra, contained an inconsistent number of ballots ranging from 98 to 101. In Lejokuku, in Greater Accra, electoral material, including result forms, was damaged due to rain as it was kept outside of the EC district office. Conclusion. Ladies and gentlemen, CODEO knows some of the initial challenges that characterize the opening of polls at some polling stations, including the late opening of some polling stations due to the late delivery of certain sensitive materials. CODEO, however, acknowledges the EC's swift resolution of most of these challenges, which have enabled voting to take place in a normal fashion. CODEO urges the general public to remain calm and exercise their right to vote if they have not already done so. God bless our homeland, Ghana, and make this a great and memorable day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Reverend David. So our findings are coming from our 1,500 parallel vote tabulation observers who have been deployed to a nationally representative sample of polling stations. So this is based on using our statistical principles, we're able to estimate, get a sense of the quality of the process so far. And I think all of you will agree that so far, generally things have gone well, and we hope that it continues through the end of the day. What we are saying is that we are encouraging citizens, if you have not cast your vote yet, to go out and exercise your franchise. I will now open the floor for any questions from our stakeholders here. I think everybody is generally satisfied. Okay, all right. So thank you very much for coming. CODEO will release its close of day.
So that was from the CODEO's offices there, where they are monitoring the election, from giving an update on what the observers have seen so far since morning.